Do you want to quickly dye your own fabric with very little mess? You don't need a lot of equipment or space. All you need are some small bottles of fabric paint, and you can create beautiful, colorful fabric in one sitting. Join me today as I dye fabric using Jacquard Dye-na-Flow fabric paint to create this beautiful, colorful fabric, perfect for your next sewing project. It's fun, it's satisfying, and it's quick. I'm glad you're here. Let's get started. I'm going to be working on a piece of cotton fabric that's about 6 by 6 inches. And I'm using these small bottles of the Jacquard Dye-na-Flow fabric paints. These small bottles of dye came in a set together, and it includes a rainbow of colors. And it really is all you need to get started in dyeing. And I also have beside me some inexpensive paintbrushes. And I have a variety of different sizes and different types of bristles. And I also have this stencil brush, which you can often find in a craft store. It has stiff bristles and it's flat on the end. And this can be really helpful when you want to work a color into the fabric and spread it around. It's an alternative to a paintbrush, and they give slightly different effects. Any kind of craft paintbrush that you have on hand will work really well for this. I'm going to cover my surface with parchment paper. That's going to protect it from moisture, and it also will help add an interesting texture to the back of my work, which I'll show you at the end. And I've taken my piece of cotton fabric and I've rinsed it under water. You can pre-wash your fabric or not. And if you haven't pre-washed it, take a little extra time to rinse it under the water to get out anything that might be in the fabric. I also have beside me a small pot of water so that I can add more water to the project if I want to spread some of those colors around using those paint brushes. So I'm going to start playing with these dyes. You need to shake them up before you start working with them, and I'm going to drop them directly onto the fabric. It's really nice to watch them soak into that wet fabric. And you can absolutely do this on dry fabric. Your effects are going to be slightly different, but I want to have that color wick into the fabric. So I'm going to move around, adding more drops. I'm just watching what happens. I don't have a plan here as I add these drops of dye. So now I'm going to switch away from this fuchsia color. I'm going to bring out an orange and do the same thing, adding some drops of color and letting them soak in to that fuchsia. There's another color that's called scarlet. It's an orangey red. I'm going to add some of that in, and it looks very similar to the orange, especially on the wet fabric. I'm going to add a few drops of that. And now I'm going to start working on the other side of my fabric. I'm bringing out this turquoise color, and I'm adding some drops, letting that soak in, just watching these pools of color spread. Now I'm bringing out a violet color. It's a very dark purple, and I'm going to start spreading that around. Now these colors are very, very vibrant when they're wet, and they're going to dry slightly lighter than they appear. They're still going to be very vibrant, but not quite as intense as they appear here wet. And now I'm going to grab this beautiful light green color and start dropping that in on the other side around that beautiful turquoise blue color. And again, I don't have a plan about where I'm going with this. I'm just enjoying watching these colors soak into the fabric. And I've decided to keep the cooler colors on the left side and the warmer colors on the right. But aside from that, I don't have a really strong idea about where I'm going with this. I'm just enjoying the process. And now I'm going to bring out my brushes, and I'm going to start with that stencil brush. I'm going to start dabbing it on the fabric where two colors are meeting to let them blend together. And now I'm going to go into that purple and start spreading that around. Now be aware when you're doing this that you're going to pick up some of that color on your brush. So when you move to another spot, you're going to transfer some of that color. And I've been doing this with a dry brush, so I'm not diluting any of the colors at this point. I'm simply spreading them around. So now that I have all this purple on this brush, I'm going to put it in my pot of water, and I'm going to come back in with my fuchsia. I'm going to add a few more drops. That's going to bring out more of that intensity of that fuchsia color. And I'm really just dropping it wherever I feel like I want a bit more of that color. And now I'm coming in with one of my paint brushes and I'm wetting it. I'm going to use it to spread some more colors. And I'm going to repeat this process back and forth, adding more drops of dye and bringing in my paint brushes to spread it around. I've added some more of that turquoise blue, and I want to start blending that into the green. So I have my wet brush, and I'm just gently touching to help spread that color around and get it to wick into the areas that I want. And I want to make sure that all the white of my fabric is covered. So as I'm moving around, I'm trying to get that ink to soak in to all those spots. So now I feel like this fabric is completely covered in the dyes. It's soaking wet. So now I want to let it dry. And I want to try and minimize as much as possible getting this ink on my hands. So I'm going to use a pair of tweezers to pick this up by the corner, and I'm going to take it over to another piece of parchment paper and put it down and let it dry. And you could also use wax paper for this. So on this parchment paper, you can see all this dye that's left behind and the beautiful patterns that it's left. So instead of wasting this, I'm going to bring in a piece of fabric. So this is a piece of fabric that I've used to mop up extra dye before. You can see some of the colors on there, and I'm going to use it again. Now you could use a piece of fabric that's exactly the same size, a 6x6, and place it on. But because I have this piece that I've been using, I'm going to place this on this dye. So I put it right on top, and this is a dry piece of fabric, so it's not immediately soaking up all of that dye. So I'm going to take a paintbrush and press it down, and then I'm going to move it around so it can soak up more dye. Now, the other option here is to add some more water to help this piece of fabric absorb this dye. And so I can take a paintbrush and dip it in the water and start spreading that water around on top of the fabric. I'm not worried about how this looks. It's looking quite muddy and messy, but when it's dry, it's going to have its own unique characteristics that I'll be able to use in my slow stitching projects. So I'm taking the water, just spreading it around, helping that dye to soak in to this piece of fabric. And then I'm going to do the same thing and bring in my tweezers and put this to the side and allow it to dry. It probably will only take a few hours for the fabric to dry. This particular type of dye suggests that you allow it 24 hours to fully dry. And after that time, to iron the fabric, and that's going to set the dye. So I'm going to leave my fabric overnight to dry. So here's my fabric. It's completely dry, and I've ironed it, and you can see how those colors are more subtle than they were before and how beautifully everything has blended together. Now this is the front side that I worked on, and because I worked on parchment paper, if you flip it over, you can see even more interesting effects that were created with the pooling of the water and the crinkling of that parchment paper. So either side is absolutely beautiful for me to use in a stitching project. Here's my piece of fabric that I used to sop up the extra dye. It looks kind of muddy and mottled, very different than the brightly colored piece, but also really beautiful. I can see this being really useful if I'm building a fabric collage and I'm wanting some natural colors, some earthy colors. It's going to be really useful. And if I'm not happy with it, I can continue to use this fabric for other projects, sopping up the ink, and see what kind of results that I get. So looking at this dyed piece, I find it very inspiring. I'm thinking about sky. It even reminds me of the Northern Lights. I can see flowers in there. So many ideas for slow stitching on top of this. In terms of the feel of the fabric, the dye has not changed the hand of the fabric, the thickness or feel of the fabric very much at all. I think part of the reason is because I started with wet fabric. That's diluted the dye somewhat. So when I take a needle and I bring it over to the fabric and I poke it through, I can feel that this fabric still feels really nice for stitching through. It is a little more substantial than when I started, but not by very much. It's almost undetectable, and it hasn't become too stiff for me to stitch through. And when I poke the needle in, it does not leave a permanent mark. So I'm really excited to use this in a piece of slow stitching. And this other piece as well is going to be perfect for using in another project. I hope you enjoyed exploring these Dye-na-Flow dyes with me today. And if you manage to pick up a set like mine, you'll have the opportunity to use even more colors than I used today. There's a full rainbow in this small kit where you'll be able to use all your favorite colors and make a piece that really speaks to you. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, happy stitching.